It's my friend for life, Mike Farron from, your credits are getting way too long. You tell everybody where you work.
Mostly MLB Network Radio, where I cover Major League Baseball, and then you'll catch me obsessed with college baseball on ESPN too.
Which is great.
Yeah.
So you're one of the best in the business. You've loved
Well,
this
thanks.
game forever, and nice to connect with you whenever we can. Chicago, of course, is still your town, so we need to start in this Major League Baseball preview with the Cubs and the White Sox. Let's go with the White Sox. Is Dylan Cease okay? Is a little porn stash going to curl up on each end? I mean, the guy seems like a hell of a pro at 28 years old to be told before the season, we're getting rid of you.
I mean, is this one of those you're concerned, like blink twice if you need help, Dylan? Is that what it is?
Yeah, Dylan, bark twice if you're in Milwaukee.
So I was in White Sox camp today. First of all, he's gone with the full beard now. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, so he is looking rugged, as you would expect.
Yes.
The vibes, they are very good in White Sox camp, which is nice. They are things feel good, even though everyone kind of behind the scenes is like, we'll see whether or not it translates on the field. But listen, they're in a position where they are not likely to contend this year or probably next. And as a result, that's why Cease's name has come about in a lot of the trade rumors, because he's a pretty darn good pitcher and he's 2 years away from free agency. So I would anticipate, based on the conversations today, that once we get to June or July, that Dylan Cease is probably wearing another uniform. But enjoy him while you can, Sox fans. It's your chance to see him. And listen, like they can't be much worse than they were a year ago, right? They are going to be better defensively. I think they do have more pitching depth. I don't know that it's going to be a much better offensive team. The bottom four spots in their lineup could be unproductive, but they're better defenders, so it's a little bit of a trade-off there.
But they were base running last year like kids in a t-ball game.
Yeah.
Is this manager the right guy to at least have them do fundamental baseball?
Well, he seems energized by the team that's in front of him. And listen, Pedro's a pretty smart baseball guy. I know it didn't feel that way to Sox fans last year, and I know a lot of his answers in press conferences left something to be desired. But I think, that's the emphasis, right, is on fundamental play. And I think this is my read on it, right? He walked into a situation with a lot of veteran guys. And when you're a first-time manager, even though you're the boss, in sport where everybody is in close quarters for as long as they are with baseball, you tend to defer to the clubhouse. And I think by the time he identified what the issues were, that it was too late. So it was, instead of like getting on the train at a station, I don't think he realized that he was jumping on while it was still going 70 miles an hour down a hill towards a cliff. So which is really odd to think about if you're going down, I guess probably more like a mountain towards a cliff. So
we have a lot of those in Illinois, as you know.
Yeah, right. No, it's very mountainous. So it's known for its high elevation.
It's where we go to yodel.
Yes.
So
that's actually someplace in Bannockburn, I believe, right? Is the yodeling?
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So the team basically gave up 2 years of potential in this last two seasons, and now, is in some form of blow it up. But Jerry Reinsdorf wants a new stadium.
Right.
And it's not a great negotiating stance, even though he appears to be talking with the Bears about a 2-stadium deal. Jerry's, closer to 90 now than he is 80, I believe, and he wants to get something done while he's still here. What kind of negotiating stance could he possibly have with a bad team on the field that draws 12,000 people a night?
Well, I think it's probably less about the record and more about the vision of what's going on. This is the least, remember, I'm doing this from 25 hours drive away. So it's basically like living in the South suburbs.
It's
the far southwest suburbs. So
yeah.
But I don't know, I have been a real estate investor on the radio. No, actually never. But my understanding is that with the group that is trying to build the stadium as part of what they're creating in this 78, that I think they view this as an anchor tenant kind of business. And of course, the old ploys of trying to get public financing are happening. And we saw Jerry in Springfield a couple of weeks ago meeting with lawmakers and giving the threat of, well, if we don't get the deal done, we might have to move, which
we might go to Oakland. I hear there's going to be a vacancy.
Which my favorite part of this is that he essentially said that the last time he did that it was all a sham, and then he expected us to forget about it. But I mean, that's always the case, right? There's what's happening with Oakland and Las Vegas is very unusual. Teams don't generally move. So it's just a matter of whether or not this company that's trying to build this neighborhood feels like the White Sox and now sounds like the Bears are appropriate anchor tenants, and how much they're willing to front, because I don't think that either ownership group is going to really want to throw in a whole lot of cash.
All right, so on the north side, the Cubs they gotten sneaky good kind of fast, and there's a lot of people who claim to be experts. They're not Mike Farron. They claim to be experts who say the Cubs could make a run this year. Agree or disagree?
I don't know that they're a whole lot different than they were last year in the end. I mean, when did they miss the playoffs by a game, right? So I guess if you want to say they made a run, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably pretty similar. I mean, if you think about it, their biggest moves were bringing back Cody Bellinger to replace Cody Bellinger, and then bringing in Shota Imanaga to replace Marcus Stroman. And Stroman was great in the first half, and obviously struggled for a month and then was hurt for coming back out of the bullpen. So I don't know that they're much better. I know everybody is really excited about this collection of Cub prospects that's coming. It's just that this group that's coming is more solid players than the last group, nearly a decade ago now, when it was Chris Bryant and Kyle Schwarber and,
right,
even Addison Russell and Javier Baez and like these impact talents. These guys are good players. I think Cade Horton, who was their first rounder 2 years ago, has a chance to be pretty impactful on the mound. But I think it's more, there's not one of these guys that you look at and go, man, that's a superstar. So I think that's part of the difference. I think there are more guys that are solid players in the mold of like a Nico Horner. So like you're going to hear a lot about Matt Shaw, probably, who was their first rounder last year out of Maryland. Matt Shaw is a really good player. Matt Shaw, if he ends up playing third base for a good chunk of the season, is if he actualizes what he can be and he doesn't have these monster struggles, is probably like a solid average third baseman. And what they really lack is that kind of monster, we always say like 900 OPS, your on baseball slugging percentage, that kind of monster in the middle of the lineup. Bellinger had a year kind of similar to that. The one guy who could change the equation for them is if Seiya Suzuki's second half is a precursor to another step forward. And so I'm a little bit more skeptical of them being like a bona fide playoff team, but they're definitely going to be in the mix. And I think that's part of what should make this summer fun, is that National League Central is 5 teams that are really pretty good. Even Pittsburgh should be, much more competitive than they had been the last couple of years. I mean, they won 76 games last year. And so it's up for grabs, and that is exciting, but I wouldn't go so far as to call the Cubs the prohibitive favorite of the division either.
That's the great Mike Farron. Plugs. When are you on?
I am on 9 to noon Central Time every morning. It's great. As soon as your show's over, you can come and join us and listen to Baseball Talk for 3 hours a day. And then I'll do a lot of Atlantic Coast Conference baseball for ESPN. So mostly Thursday nights, I think, on ACC Network is where you'll find me.
Yeah, and by the way, there's nothing to listen to after I go off the air anyway, so you might as well make sure you're tuned up on baseball. The great Mike Farron. Follow you on social where?
Mike_Farron on the, I still call it Twitter.
On the Twitter. See, X boys and girls. I don't want Elon Musk fighting with me. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Dr. Deborah Birx rejoins us now. Andrea's here. Nick's here. You're here. Thanks for listening to the Steve Cochran Show on the Big 89 WLS. Dr. Birx, RSV in kids, we initially are little kids. It can be pretty dangerous. I had it, in combination with a couple of things in 2017. It's the sickest I've ever been. So how dangerous is RSV?
Well, the good news is there's a vaccine now. So that's really terrific. And so particularly difficult RSV for children because it can cause severe what we call croup in common mom language, which is very frightening to many moms because their children can get in serious trouble. And having a child that croups all the time, when their lips get blue, it's worrisome. So in the same way with the elderly, it can be significant in the elderly. And, you know, what you just described is everybody being sick all at once. Remember, the last 4 years, we haven't had a real influenza B. That's the flu that comes later in the spring. You know, the A is usually around Christmas and then B closer to spring break. This is going to be our worst influenza B season that we've had in a long time. And it's the slope of rise of your wastewater in the Midwest is extraordinary. So you've got a lot of influenza B, which you haven't seen for the last few years. And so that's why it looks like everybody's got a respiratory illness.
All right, so explain the significance of the wastewater thing in terms like you're talking to someone simple-minded like me, and tell us why it matters.
Well, it's our only early alert system. So remember, we've stopped posting about test positivity. We don't know where the cases are, but we can see through wastewater what's in the community, and it's local. So if you go on their site, you can see it by county or you can see it by region. And I think that's really important because disease is spread locally. So we want people to have the information locally. So if you look at the Midwest site for A, B, influenza A, B, and RSV and COVID, they're all rising again right now for a spring surge. And I think the reason that's important is you want to know what your child has. I think what also would be super helpful, and I just call on the FDA, get tests to the home for RSV, flu, and COVID. Because bundling up your kids to get them to the pediatrician when you could use telehealth, if you had a home test, critical.
I know we need to stay up to date on our shots, our vaccinations, flu, now COVID, shingles, et cetera. Is there still talk about making a combination flu, COVID, shingles, like one giant vaccine for everything?
Well, what we would need first is a vaccine against COVID that has a longer duration to protect longer against infection and severe disease. Right now, it's under half a year, and that's why the CDC finally has recommended 2 shots a year, particularly in the most vulnerable. We've known that this is a short-lived vaccine. If we had a long-lived vaccine that could protect at least a year, then we could start working on combination vaccines. But the way it is now with its short duration of protection, we really can't combine it with others like we do with childhood vaccines. And let me just make it very clear again, childhood vaccines do protect against both infection and disease. The flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine may not prevent infection in the same way that our childhood vaccines do.
Now,
Okay.
I've got the 3 grandkids, and obviously their mom and dad are great at watching out for them, and then I'm great at adding information they didn't ask for. But, Nick, you're a dad with a couple little ones who bring home everything. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, is there anything on your worry radar, measles, any of that stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen these increases in measles cases, and, you know, I think most kids do get the mumps MMR vaccine, but is there any evidence or, you know, where is this coming from? Is it non-vaccinated kids and parents deciding more and more that no, they don't want to have their kids vaccinated for, you know, they could say religious reasons?
I think the problem is we weren't really clear about the difference between how the COVID vaccine works, which was only studied to prevent severe disease, and how our childhood vaccines work. And they're vastly different. So the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine protects your child against infection. And measles can be deadly. So, I mean, this is our problem. We haven't seen deadly measles in 50, 60 years. So people have forgotten how deadly polio, measles, how long-term consequences to severe mumps infection. So we've been just, going along happily with our childhood vaccines and not really constantly making people aware of what those actual diseases look like. I think as people see how severe measles are, measles is, they're going to come back and get vaccinated. But that's our job as public health officials, to constantly keep people aware of how severe these diseases were, and that's why we're vaccinating now.
Dr. Birx, if you've had the flu or had COVID recently, how soon after should you get each respective vaccine?
So there's two types of flu, the A and B. And so if you got the flu vaccine in the early fall, your protection may be waning right now. And so if I had an elderly family member, and I saw your wastewater, I would consider getting them additional influenza shot if it's been more than 6 months for the elderly. And this is just practical immunology to protect them more against influenza B. If you've had COVID recently, let that full immune response develop. Because the natural infection gives you a broader, more comprehensive immune response to COVID. I'm not saying go out there and get it, but if you had it recently, I would still delay on vaccines. Remember, the vaccine that we have was against the original Omicron.
Right.
We now have the daughter of Omicron with a lot more mutations. And so we do need another new vaccine. And so for COVID, I would wait until they have the new vaccine available, unless you have a vulnerable family member undergoing cancer treatment or over 75. And I would, if they were my parent, and what I'm doing with my mom, who's 95, is I make sure she has a COVID booster every 6 months because her immune system has aged. And so she doesn't have as good immune response even to any vaccine compared to what I do or others do that are younger. And so I'm very proactive in getting her vaccinated.
Got it.
Could you just come by the house and take care of that for us? Yeah. Swing by. No, a little busy. Listen, Dr. Birx, it is always a pleasure to speak with you. We appreciate the information. And again, I hope you hear all of what she said. But if you hear nothing else, hear that if you love somebody that's dealing with cancer and treatments of cancer, regardless of their age, this is vitally important. Anybody that's immunocompromised, and obviously older folks and tiny little ones. So it's not just about you, kids. Thank you, Dr. Birx.
Thank you. Always great to talk with you both.
Thanks, Dr. Birx.
And again, her book, The Untold Story, the Trump Administration's Silent Invasion, COVID-19, and the Pandemic Yet to Come.
She is absolutely brilliant. I shadowed her for 48 hours when she was in Chicago. And at the height of COVID, every day she would get a state-by-state report.
Right.
And for the largest cities, Chicago, New York, and it was maybe minimum 12 to 15 pages per state with graphs and color and just the data and showing.
And she'd absorb it.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
And she could say, oh, New Hampshire? Oh, Chicago? I mean, she could city by city, state by state. Yeah, would give you a picture. She's just brilliant.